both the Aspen Institute and the University of Maryland, and her family has been influential in all, and they all seem to be part of the Venn diagram that produces Michael Kaiser. So I'm going to sit in the back and listen, but I'm going to really look forward to this because I've been really trying to focus on the importance of not only the arts in America, but the connection of arts to the humanities and everything that we do. And Damian has been a superstar in thinking that through and expressing it. So thank you, Damian.
Thank you, Walter.
How you doing? Good to see you, Jim.
Does everybody see? Thank you, Walter, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and Damian, Chairman of the Arts Committee, Director of the Arts and Humanities at the Aspen Institute. In the year 2000, I was asked to serve on a search committee at the Kennedy Center, where at the time I was a trustee, and the quest was to find someone really, really outstanding to take the Kennedy Center to the next level of excellence. And it was interesting that at the meeting, the only name that was heard was the name Michael Kaiser. If we could just get Michael Kaiser. So of course, that set up a chain of events where we traveled to New York, and Michael, who was at the time executive director of the Royal Opera House in London, he flew over, and we met in the Knickerbocker Club, I'll never forget, and he walked in and sat down as if he had known all of us for years, and thus began an association with Michael Kaiser and the Kennedy Center that is as fresh today as from the moment he took over in January of 2001. His taking over the Kennedy Center as our president absolutely transformed not only the center, but the role of the performing arts in America. Michael came to us with prior experience in the private sector. He became known as the turnaround artist when he left his private business called Kaiser Associates and took on the let's say the rehabbing of the American Ballet Theater, getting them out of their financial difficulties and expanding their programs. He did the same thing for the Alvin Ailey Dance Company. For a time, he was manager of the Kansas City Ballet. And his big turnaround, of course, was when he went to London and turned the Royal Ballet into a tremendously profitable and viable organization once again. So here he came to the Kennedy Center, and we were not a sinking ship. Actually, we were very much afloat. But that vision thing was missing, and that's what Michael has now provided for 13 years. During his tenure at the Kennedy Center, I might mention some of the signature things that we're so proud of that he himself initiated. The Sondheim Festival. Festivals with countries all over the world. He took us globally. So we've had festivals, with just to name a few, China, Japan, India, the Arab world, the African nations, and Latin America, just to name a few. And that has brought the world of culture to this city, and it has reverberated not only here, but around America and around the world. We've had a retrospective, for example, of Tennessee Williams' work. This 10 sequential plays of the great playwright, August Wilson. But I think one of the things that excited so many of us was that the two productions that originated at the Kennedy Center that Michael overlooked or oversaw was Follies and Ragtime, both of which went to Broadway. And they were really, really outstanding productions. As you know, in the early 2000s, we were thinking of things that were global, and Michael, I believe, took that from a dream to a reality for the center. He took us nationally with his education programs. He took us internationally and nationally with his Kennedy Center Arts Management Institute, which subsequently has become the DeVos Institute for Arts Management. The State Department has called upon him numerous times to be a cultural ambassador, and he has done work and continues to do work in 80 countries around the world. I think I have just told you a little bit about Michael. On top of all of that, Michael put together the affiliation of the Kennedy Center and the Washington National Opera, and he directly oversees the programming of the National Symphony Orchestra. Both of these organizations live at the Kennedy Center and are under our aegis at this particular time. As luck would have it, and it's bittersweet, Michael suggested several years ago that he would like to retire. And I'm not very happy about that, and I don't think anybody else was either. But he has decided to move on with the DeVos Institute, and guess where he's going? He's going to the University of Maryland, which is the intersection of my three loves, the Aspen Institute, the Kennedy Center, and the University of Maryland. The DeVos Institute will go with him, and they will be able to offer degrees in arts management, and Michael has been given the very prestigious title of Professor of the Program, a title that is given to very few, and I think he is the only one at the University of Maryland. That is the esteem in which he is held. So we're sorry to see him leave the Kennedy Center, but for myself, I'll get to see him every other week. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alma. That was such a wonderfully comprehensive and personal portrait of Michael's work. And as you said, though, it's just the beginning, because Michael does more than any mortal I know. He is working in one way or another pretty much all of the time. He's someone who was somewhat mythical, I think, when I first met you. We met actually for the first time at the Dance Magazine Awards, I think, which was roughly right about the time you were transitioning back from London. And he was someone I'd only heard about, even though I'd even guested with ABT. It's somehow he just had this mythical status as someone who got things done and made a difference and left places in far better shape than when he arrived. But it's so much more than that, and that's what the purpose of this talk today was, really to celebrate many of the things that Alma outlined, but also to talk about where the arts are really today in America and in the context of where they are in the world. No one knows more about that than Michael, who travels constantly. In fact, I should note right now that Michael has a hard out, as they say. At 1:30, he will be out the door on his way, yes, to work with another arts organization down in Florida. So we'll do about an hour of discussion with the last 15 minutes as questions and answers from you, and I hope you'll participate, all of you, in this roundtable. So first thing I'd say is, Michael, thank you. Welcome, and it's always great to talk with you. Already today, famously, I've seen already how it happens. Michael was here about a half hour early. Which is the mark of something that I think we all understand, that level of commitment, that it's not going to be happenstance, it's not going to be by accident, it's going to be thought through and methodical and given the appropriate amount of time. So we already had a wonderful discussion even before this. But, you know, I guess I should ask you right off the bat, is this a surprise to you, how all this has gone? I mean, she referenced, you had your own Kaiser Associates. You were a management consultant in the early '80s. You were kind of one of the leaders of the movement for measurement and benchmarking, and that's a stretch to where we are today.
I'm surprised to be here today. And let me just say thank you to Alma for that beautiful introduction. The one thing she didn't mention is they may have only been mentioning my name when they were looking for a new president of the Kennedy Center, but she actually went to London as a spy. And everyone told me there's this woman walking around asking questions about you, and that was Alma Gildenhorn. I really set out to be an opera singer. That was what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I was just hideously bad at singing, which was really unfortunate because I so wanted to do that. And so yes, I did take this detour into the for-profit world. I knew I wanted to be in the arts somehow. Ever since my parents took me to see Barbara Cook sing in The Music Man when I was 4 years old. And she sang Goodnight My Someone, and the front of her house is a scrim, and they lit it from behind, and you could look into the house and see the little girl Amaryllis playing the piano, and it was the most astonishing experience of my life. And I keep telling Barbara Cook that story because now she works for me, which is great. But I wanted to be a singer, and I was bad, and I decided I couldn't be a singer. I figured that out pretty quickly, and decided I'd have to figure out my way into this world, and it seemed the way I could find it was through the management side. But there was no career path back then, really. The world's changed an awful lot since the 1970s with respect to arts management as a career. At that point, there was no academic program in arts management, and the way you got in was to fail as an artist. And since I had failed way too young, that wasn't going to work. And then I had my own business, and I was asked to join the board of what was then the Washington Opera, now the Washington National Opera, and I was the most obnoxious board member in history because I really wanted to make the decisions the staff makes. I didn't want to be a board member. And I realized that, and I decided to sell my business, which I did, and look for a job, and got a job with this bankrupt ballet company in Kansas City, and we turned that around, and then I went from place to place. I didn't have a plan to end up here. But I can say that the first consulting firm I worked for before I was in the arts was in the Watergate building, the one where Cuppa Cuppa is, right? That's far 600 Virginia. And I had an office that overlooked the Kennedy Center, and I always looked there saying, I would so like to be there one day. And so I knew pretty early that I wanted to be at the Kennedy Center, and I'm so lucky it worked out this way.
It's the value of having goals, right there. So trace for me, just in your mind, and this relates to your management work where you go around the world and talk to young managers and to institutions that are in crisis, or all of them. The range of decisions that go into an arts organization obviously changes with the type of organization. And you started at Kansas City Ballet, for instance, where you had a strong artistic director, Todd Bolander, at the time.
I did.
But the company itself was ailing in its management on the executive side. How do you manage that, and how have you seen that change between that artistic side and the executive director side? Because I've seen some great changes, what I perceive over the course of my career, which started as a dancer and now as a director and producer, where those lines get quite blurry at this point as far as financial, certainly about fundraising, which I consider an issue. So I was curious how you approach that.
Sure. I have seen a transition because when money was not as difficult as it is today, when the money situation was not as difficult, we really did have artists running our arts organizations, and they could dream about the projects they wanted to do, and the administrative side was responsible for finding the resources for making those dreams come true. What's happened, I think, over these last 30, 40 years is as we've had a lot of inflation in the arts, and as it's gotten harder and harder to afford to fulfill the dreams of artists, the boards and the executive directors have taken more and more of the authority, and we end up in a situation in a lot of organizations where the artistic director acts like the naughty child and the executive director acts like the angry parent. The naughty child says, I want this, I want this, I want this, and the angry parent says, no, 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 we can't afford it. That's not a very helpful relationship. And in my work, what I have to do is to really take organizations, particularly ones that are financially challenged, and make them understand that the most important thing for a healthy organization, healthy in every description of the word, is exciting art. And if the art is exciting, and if strong marketing is used to support that art, you build what I call the family of people who care about the organization, the audience members, the volunteers, the donors, the board members. And when that family gets really happy, and when it gets larger and growing and it's engaged, they produced revenue for the organization, which if it goes back into more good programming, which is marketed well, the family gets happier and larger and more engaged. And it's that cycle that characterizes healthy arts organizations. What happens to sick arts organizations is that they think the way they're going to get healthy is to cut their way to health and to save their way to health. And the things that are the most discretionary, the easiest things to cut, are art and marketing. Because you don't have to fire anybody. You do a little less new work, you do a little less ambitious work, you do a smaller play, you do a smaller opera, you use last year's sets, whatever. The problem is when you cut art and when you cut marketing, your family loses interest, they lose engagement, they lose excitement, and your family gets smaller and you have less revenue. And so you get sicker and sicker because you save even more on the art and your family gets even less interested, and that's how sick organizations get sick. So the hard part when you walk into an organization, I was with an organization this weekend in California that's quite ill, and I had to say to the board and to the staff, you're not spending enough on art. You're not putting enough into the product. You're not making exciting enough art. You don't even have your art planned for next season, let alone 2 or 3 years in advance. And if you're not planning for 2 and 3 years in advance, how can you plan something huge and special and amazing to excite people? And they look at me like I'm insane because they say, don't you know we have no money? We have no money for art. We have to cut. And so I think the big challenge is to return the arts to a period where really the art predominates, because that is what makes for healthy organizations.
So, but assuming there is scarcity in these circumstances, so you need the money to go to the art, and I think this is where, I mean, I've seen pushback on some of your HuffPost pieces, which are prescriptive in this measure. How do you respond actually to the problem where they say, but we actually don't have the money to do it?
You save on absolutely everything you can and put as much as you can in the art, part one. Part two is you plan big projects early enough in advance that you have the time to find new donors who might care about that art to support that art. Mm-hmm. Too many arts organizations plan their art only for next season. Well, that means you only have a few months to find people to pay for it, which means you go back to the same donor over and over and over again, and they get tired and bored and frustrated of being the ones you rely on all the time. My approach for my big projects is to think 3, 4, and 5 years out, and that gives me time to find new donors who care about that project. For instance, last spring, our big project at the Kennedy Center was a festival of the Nordic countries, Norway, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Greenland, Iceland, and the Faroe and Åland Islands. We spent 5 years working on that project. We had 5 years to research and cultivate donors in our country and abroad, many of whom had never heard of us before, but we had time to bring them into the family. So we expanded our family hugely with this festival. More than half the costs were paid for by donors we had never met before. But because we had this time, we could expand and do this very large, ambitious project and not kill ourselves financially and not tire out our core of our donor base. So I'm working far enough in advance. Working far in advance also gives you the chance to do joint ventures. I got to American Ballet Theater. We were very, very, very ill. We had a $5.5 million accumulated deficit. We didn't have any money for new point shoes. I announced the biggest project in our history. We did a full-length ballet based on Shakespeare's Othello, new music by Elliot Goldenthal, new choreography by Lara Lubavitch, new sets and costumes, the whole works, huge venture. And everyone thought I was insane because everyone knew that we were a day from bankruptcy. But I planned it for 3 years out, and that gave me the 3 years to look for the money, but it also gave me 3 years to build a joint venture with the San Francisco Ballet, so they paid for half of it. So already my costs were cut in half just the day we signed that deal. So there are creative ways to do interesting work without spending a fortune. My staff, Garth Ross from my staff, is sitting right facing me to make sure I stay honest, but we're right in the middle of budget cuts for next year. We're doing our budget for next year, and we're cutting and pruning to make next year's budget work. I'm not a spendthrift about things, but I do believe in cutting and cutting and cutting to put more money on the stage. So when I got to the Kennedy Center, one of the first things I did is I cut about $5 million out of our budget that I call the Nuts and Berries Fund. They were all kinds of nice things to have, staff lunches and breakfasts and, things that we were doing. We were sending 15 people to, different conferences when one would have been plenty, and cutting way back and put all that money right on the stage. That's how we afforded the Sondheim celebration. So it's really about redirecting resources. It's not about being a spendthrift, but it's recognizing that our mission is about art and education, and our programming has to be the focus of the work we do.
So your message to the executive directors is to provide that long-term stability and long-term planning for the artistic side to create these things.
And to encourage the artists. When I walk into any new organization, the first thing I do is I sit down with the artistic director and I ask them only one question, which is, what do you want? And I really, really press them on that. And these days, unfortunately, what they want is so modest because they've been beaten down for so many years that their dreamingness has really suffered. And I think that's a huge issue for the arts in general and for the future of the arts, because the only way we're going to compete with all the substitute forms of entertainment is if our art is really astonishing, and that takes really amazing people, much more creative than I am, to dream. And so my job is to encourage my artistic staff to really dream, and then it's my job to create the timetable for those dreams that I think is affordable, where I think I can get the audience and the donor base to pay for those dreams.
It's interesting because my experience has been, and it's borne out by the people I know who've become artistic directors, or my own experience as an artistic director, or just the long years at New York City Ballet and other places, is that increasingly the artistic side is what I would consider perhaps overly responsive to the financial concerns. And I mean, is that what you mean by that?
Absolutely. I call it planning art to the budget. Instead of saying, I want to do this, I have a dream of a project, this would be so amazing, it's how much do I have to spend? If that's the first question that an artist asks, the work is just not going to have that same kind of immediacy and excitement. I call them transformational projects. Transformational projects are projects that change the way the community looks at an arts organization. And if all you're doing is saying, well, I had $50,000 last year, I'll have $51,000 this year, what can I do for $51,000? That's not the recipe for coming up with that most amazing thing you've ever heard of. So yes, I don't want artists to plan to a budget. I want them to dream, and then it's my job to figure out how do we afford it, in which configuration, and when. Right. And the when is critical. I have never met an artist who doesn't mind waiting a year to do a project. I've never met an artist who says, this project's only valid if it's in September of 2014. No one minds if it's in June of 2015. If you could say we can get the resource and do it we can do it well if we string them out in this order, I find artists are thrilled.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of this has to do with long-term versus short-term thinking, which is, I find, when I look at issues facing society to be an epidemic issue, about that level of thinking, we just need to get to there, as opposed to we can look 5 years down the line. Exactly what you said about that applies to education, certainly, and arts education. It applies to all of the kind of investments one might make given the time to do them.
Absolutely right. I don't think it's unique to the arts, but it's especially dangerous in the arts, because in the arts we have not one penny to waste, and we don't have one staff man-hour to waste. Everything has to be used well, and that means you really want to plan extremely carefully in order to allow this amazing work to happen.
What do you think about the proliferation of building that's gone on over the last...
Well, it's a big issue.
I would say decades, but let's just say the last decade.
And if you look in Washington, I think we've built 8 theaters in the last 10 years. It is a very scary thing to me. If you think about my cycle, great art, great marketing, building your family, and the resource going back into great art, building isn't in there. And I haven't seen any mission of any arts organization that says our mission is to have a great facility. And what I find is that too many arts organizations, I flippantly call it the edifice complex, but have this feeling that they need to have a bigger and better facility constantly. Now, there is a reason for a good facility. There are real tangible reasons why organizations need good spaces to work, and in many cases there's a symbolic value to a building. But organizations should not be building buildings that they cannot afford. And what I see across the country, and in fact across the world, are a large number of beautiful buildings that are either wholly empty or half empty, where the work of the organization is stopped because they are house poor. And this is something that is extremely dangerous. And so my basic prescription is, until you get your cycle humming, until your work is amazing and your family is huge and everyone's loving and engaged, and only when you believe you can take a little bit of the money out of that cycle that you would have put into art and put it into a building, only then are you ready for a building. When I ran Alvin Ailey, we were bankrupt. We turned them around in 2 years, 2.5 years, and they were solvent. And everyone came to me. We were renting a very horrible set of studios. And everyone came to me and said, now it's time to build a building, and now it's time to build a building. I said, are you crazy? We just paid off a deficit. We're just at zero. We don't have anything. We're just at zero. And luckily, the person who replaced me, Sharon Luckman, one of the great arts managers in America, waited a decade. And after a decade, she said, now we're ready. And as a result, the Ailey built the largest dedicated dance building, I believe, in the world at this point, and didn't miss a beat, didn't lose their stride. The work didn't suffer because they were ready for it. But too many organizations feel like the building is the answer. And, you know, it's the irony of it all is one of the great, probably the most famous arts building on the earth in terms of architecture, houses not such a great arts institution, the Sydney Opera House. You know, gorgeous building, terribly troubled organization within it, because it was really designed to be a concert hall, not an opera house. And this is a problem. And you can have the most famous building in the world and still be troubled. And the building doesn't solve the problem.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, clearly, from a short-term, long-term point of view, the short-term funder can wrap their head around the bricks and mortar. And that makes sense. There is something we started talking about earlier, though, that there's an irony to this, of course, because in the new age of technology that we are just barely beginning, essentially, bricks and mortar are becoming increasingly irrelevant.
Absolutely. I mean, I've written about this and I've gotten into deep trouble for it, but I still do believe it. I believe that the Metropolitan Opera movie theater broadcasts are a huge moment in history that we really need to evaluate in very great depth if we care about the future of the arts. They are beautiful. They are amazing. The Met has every reason to do them. I find nothing wrong with their doing them. But there's a but attached to it, which is we've changed for the first time in a long time the distribution model for the arts. And having spent a lot of time in the corporate world looking how industries evolve, when you change distribution, you change industries. Ladies' stockings is my favorite example. I don't know if none of you ladies are old enough to remember when I was young, but women's stockings you used to buy at the department store, and they were very expensive. And there were 40,000 stock keeping units, and everyone had different colors and different styles. And then Haynes Corporation said, this is silly. Let's put them in an egg. Let's standardize them, and we're going to sell them in drugstores. And all of a sudden, the entire industry changed. We're at that moment in the arts world, I think, where all of a sudden, you know, now we can distribute arts. The problem of the arts has always been it's so expensive because we only have so many seats in our theater, and we only serve at the Kennedy Center Opera House 2,300 people at a time. But now, with broadcasts, you can now serve many thousands of people at a time, many thousands of people at a time all over the world in a very big geography, and build the family I'm talking about, not just the local family, but the national or international family. And I believe this is going to be huge, because if you look at young people who will one day be our older people, who will be our arts consumers, we hope, the way they get information is primarily online, and they sit with an iPad and the headsets, and they're happy as can be. And when opera, I believe the movie theater broadcasts are just a way station. I think they're a transition. I believe it's going to very quickly be to our homes, to beautiful sound systems and beautiful visual systems at homes, and people are going to get to see the Met on demand. They don't have to go at 8 o'clock on a Thursday. They can see whenever it's convenient, and they can see this gorgeous production with great singers and amazing sets and costumes and great sound. And I believe that's going to change the arts, and I think it's going to make it very hard for regional arts organizations who are being forced to charge more and more and more per ticket to compete. To sit one orchestra seat at the Metropolitan Opera in the center orchestra today is $300. The movie broadcast is $25. And it's not the exact same experience, believe me. I love the live performing arts more than anything in life. But when it starts to be $300 for 2 tickets to the Met, you can buy an iPad and watch Leontine Price on YouTube forever, for free. This is a serious teetering point that we're at.
It cuts a couple of different ways, listening to you talk. One is that often the reason to build in this day and age is to outfit your theater electronically. It's one of the things I hear about. Oh, we
Yes.
need to do this because then we can do all these things. So that's one aspect of it. But the industry, with respect to the ladies' hosiery industry, the newspaper industry is what I'm thinking about in this, which is that you end up with large players disseminating most of the work, and the local players being crowded out because they can't compete on any level, financially or with content.
Right. And I'm not worried about the little local players. I'm not. I'm not worried about the lack of creativity. I have people saying, I want to start a chamber music ensemble or an orchestra, or I want to do a local theater company. I believe people have this huge need to create art. It goes back to the Lascaux caves. People in every society create art, except for totalitarian societies. And I believe one of the reasons why they don't last is because people don't have the opportunity for that free expression. So people need to create. And we're going to have small local arts organizations, I believe, forever. But I also believe we're going to have these mega organizations who are really sending out amazing stuff in a very easy to digest, inexpensive format. And I worry about all those organizations in the middle. I worry about our regional opera companies and theater companies and symphonies who are already facing huge problems. And I do worry about their ability to survive in this world with the huge ones and the very more modest-sized ones, and what's going to happen in the middle. We're already seeing it in modern dance. We're already seeing it in modern dance. As the modern dance masters of the 1950s, 60s, 70s start to pass away, we're seeing fewer and fewer of the large modern dance organizations. You have Ailey and Paul Taylor as the really only 2 ones left. And Mark Morris is relatively new, but we can't call him young anymore. He'll be 60 years old next year. And then we have the smaller organizations, but we haven't had any of those smaller organizations to bubble up to become the $5, $6, $7, $8 million modern dance
And
organizations.
is that the measure, though? Because, I've been thinking about this since we touched on this earlier. So we had a bunch of names we went through quickly. Oh,
Right.
These are young, scrappy choreography-driven companies where they want to have this, they're going to make it work. It's very episodic. It has a hard time with long-term planning, but it's
Yes.
driven by the art. Should those by nature have to grow big?
No, they don't. There's nothing.
Is that success otherwise?
No, I don't believe big is good in the arts. I will always remember working with a wonderful genius named Richard Foreman. Richard Foreman is perhaps the leading American absurdist playwright. He had a theater that he recently called the Ontological Hysteric Theater Company in New York. Richard Foreman wins every foundation grant known to mankind, and he had the most astonishingly healthy balance sheet of a theater company, because all these foundations gave him all this money, and he didn't spend a lot on his productions, and his theater only had 99 seats. And I went to him and I said, Mr. Foreman, you have all this money, why don't you go to a larger theater? And he said, you know what? He said, I know there are 99 people a night who like my work. And if I go to a bigger theater, I either have to spend all my time marketing, which isn't interesting to me, or I have to change my work, which isn't interesting to me, or I have to lie to people and say the work is something that it isn't. He said, I'm not going to do that. This is the right size theater for me. So I don't believe size means that a big production is better than a little production. The Peter Brook Midsummer Night's Dream, which is a production that changed my whole life, was a very, very spare production. If you might remember back into the 1970s, a white wall, Midsummer Night's Dream of the Royal Shakespeare Company. But I do worry about arts, about money pouring into the arts. And I worry about the modern dance field because we don't have a draw now for people to care and to learn about. We don't have a whole lot of writing about modern dance. We don't have a lot of discussion. It's not in the discussion the way it was 20 years ago, when you had Twyla Tharp with a company and Merce Cunningham with a company and Martha Graham company was big, and you had all these companies, and it was much more discussed, and money came into the art form, which allowed the artists to prosper and allowed the creators to create. So I do worry about the draw on resources from the community, and I worry that modern dance is losing out, and that does scare me.
And is that, I mean, there's something to be said in that simply about the work. If the work is working, things work.
But the work has to be
But-
supported by an infrastructure, a marketing and fundraising infrastructure. And I know that sounds boring, but it's just true. And a lot of young people, and a lot of us in this room are not young creative people, making art, but there's a big movement now not to form companies, but rather to do projects. And I get in trouble when I talk about this too, and I'm called very old-fashioned, but I worry about the project mentality. I love projects because you can be so flexible. You get a group of artists together, say, let's do this one idea. You can do it amazingly interesting, creative work. I love that. The problem is the next time the artist wants to do a project, they have to start all over again and find the donors again and build the audience again. Whereas when you have a company structure, the real benefit of that is two. Number one, you have this ability to build a membership and a group of people who care about you, a family who stays with you. The Kennedy Center has to raise $75 million a year. If I have to do that from scratch every year, I'd kill myself. That's part one. But also the nature of ensemble. And in some art forms, the ensemble is critical, and in some art forms it isn't. But when ensemble is critical, putting together a structure for one project and disappearing, the ensemble just isn't going to be all that great. I wouldn't want to hear a string quartet that assembles for one day versus one that's played together for 20 years. I wouldn't want to see Swan Lake with a group of dancers who've had a week to rehearse. It just isn't the same as watching the Corps de Ballet of the Mariinsky, who's coming this week, tomorrow night. It's a different thing. So I think there's a real value to the structure of a company format. Even though I love the fluidity of the project, I worry that it means that we're not going to have the resources we need. And you tie that together with an aging donor base, which is the scariest trend to me, where I do not see that young people are being as generous to the arts as their parents have been. And you put those two trends together, and it scares me that 20 years from now, we're not going to have as rich and as diverse and as exciting a mix of arts opportunities as we had in the second half of the 20th century.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to get at now is maybe what the topography in your ideal landscape looks like. And how do you actually get there when those infrastructures aren't widespread? And we're looking at, I'm focusing on the United States here, certainly. Let's keep it there. But, when we're looking at trying to spread diversity, first of all, of expression and impact and opportunity to be creative and have arts, diversity of product, that we're not all trying to do the same things, which is what's happened in a large part around this country. Certainly in my field, there was a point where I was looking at companies for a festival I run in Vail, and everybody was doing the same rap.
I don't want to see
I was
jewels
like,
by
everybody's
another
doing
company.
it. Everybody's doing it. Everybody's doing the same, and you realize, wow, okay, that's on the one hand, these are things that are working. They're selling in their local town because they're doing them. That's why they're doing them.
But
But they aren't set apart in any way.
They don't set apart, and that plays into, again, I use Jewels, the example of Balanchine's Jewels, work of genius, unbelievable. I've now seen 20 companies dance Jewels. I don't need another company to do Jewels, because if everyone does Jewels, then it really plays into the power of the broadcast. Because then if you can see the best Jewels ever on broadcast versus your local ballet company doing Jewels, I know who wins. If the ticket price is different, if the quality of dancing is different, if the quality of sets, costumes, and lighting are different, I know who wins.
But to me, Jules, is in that interesting
I know,
category.
I'm sorry to attack
You
Balanchine.
got
I love
it. Here we
Balanchine.
go. No,
I adore Jules. I
No,
didn't
to
say
me,
that-
it's Shakespeare. The Balanchine rap has crossed, in large part, ballets like Serenade or Jules or Agon. And there's Shakespeare, which can bear repetition on a variety.
I know, just how many times? And no, I don't mean how many times can you see Jules. I could see Jules all the time. But I mean, if I'm a company, I'm trying to do something ambitious and distinctive and create a reason for being in a world that's going to be very resource constrained, then I'm not sure I want to copy what 40 other ballet companies are doing the same year, particularly some incredibly illustrious companies where I may not compare well.
Right.
And so that's how I use that example.
Let's go back to the ideal topography, and how do you think that relates to politics and issues of subsidizing, which are always thorny in this country? It's an uneasy relationship with arts funding on a governmental level. But when I look around, I'm actually seeing on the state and city level, quite a different level of commitment certainly has always been there, because there's something different. It relates back a little bit to my friend Greg Mosher said, no one doesn't like their child's painting on their fridge.
That's right.
And it's in your town, it's in your city, it starts to feel different.
I mean, you've raised lots of topics.
Yes.
If you want to talk government funding, you have to go back to the fact that our country was founded by the Puritans who thought music and dance were evil. And so we've had this separation of art and state going back to the founding of America. And that was unfortunate, I think, but it's what we have. What's interesting is to look abroad, because when you look abroad right now, where governments are almost all cutting their arts funding, the arts organizations are all looking to America to say, what do we do about this? And I think we have some answers. But at the state and local level, where there's actually, you can measure more of the impact on a community, on a group of children, on an economy, I think there people are realizing the arts can play an absolutely critical role in the economic development of a region, and very importantly, I think, on the education of our children to prepare them for a creative economy where they need to be able to do more than just do math and science.
Let's shift to that. That's a great segue to that equal opportunity for arts for every child that is embodied in Any Given Child, your program. Can you talk about the impact of that and how that's developed?
Sure. One of the problems we have in the arts is every arts education program sounds good. We bring 300 children to the ballet. We brought 800 children to the museum. We allowed 400 children to do a school play. It is good. It sounds good. It is good. The problem is that we have no continuity to the education of our children in the arts anymore. We did when I was a child. I had arts every week, 3 times a week. I had music or painting or whatever. I had a steady arts curriculum that took me through my school years. Now we leave the individual purchase decision to the individual teacher. So a 3rd grade teacher may love the arts, and the children in the class will go to the museum and do a class play and have a teaching artist in the classroom and have these wonderful experiences. Then we take these same children from the 3rd grade and we move them to the 4th grade, and the teacher doesn't quite know about the arts or care about the arts, and the children get nothing. They got a lot in 3rd grade, they get nothing in 4th grade. We don't teach any subject that way. If your children came home and said, we're not doing math this year because my teacher doesn't like it, you wouldn't accept that. But that's what we accept with the arts. And what we're doing is, as arts organizations, we're trying to jump in the breach by offering arts education, but it's a herky-jerky, episodic arts education that's not really educating anybody. So with some help from the Ford Foundation, I did a study of this, and I started to put together a picture of what could we do, and we decided that what we could do is, in a given community, if we got the powers that be, the mayor, the superintendent, to buy in, what we could do is audit all the arts available in that community, specific to that community, and we could start to create, with what's already in the schools and what's in the community, we could create a K-8 system that every child would go through, not just up to the individual teacher. The individual teacher could add, but every child would go through this curriculum. I'll give you an example. Sacramento, California was the first city in which we installed this program called Any Given Child. And I called it Any Given Child because I'm not concerned with, do we serve 800 or 5,000, 12,000? I care about what we do for a child, and do we really give them a good education? And in Sacramento, in 4th grade, every student studies Latino culture. And there's a beautiful Latino Cultural Center. And so 4th grade, the anchor organization is the Latino Cultural Center. There's a different anchor in 3rd grade and 2nd grade and 1st grade. But each organization knows where they belong. They all participate in creating this system. And so every child goes through this system from K-8 in Sacramento. It's now in 14 American cities. And what's interesting is it just makes sense to funders, it makes sense to politicians, it makes sense to educators. And the whole community arts get together to make a system that works for that community, and it's community specific. Money's pouring into these 14 cities. Donors, foundations, corporations saying, well, this makes sense because we know where the money's going, and there's a real systematic view towards arts education. I believe we're going to end up with much better educated young people if we can create this system for them rather than leaving it up to each teacher to make their own decisions.
It seems to me, in some of the work I'm doing with education, with the President's Committee, and just things that I do myself, it's that the partner, and you mentioned it at the end there, was the local arts community. Because to me, this is the opportunity for the new slice of the work pie for the 21st century that probably should have been happening much more substantively all along, but let's look at that now as the opportunity for what new revenue streams, new work.
I agree with that. And a lot of arts organizations have been doing a lot of education, but they're doing it in isolation from all the others in the community. So if each organization is working on its own and not thinking about how to collaborate across, then we're losing a lot of the power of it. And then you, again, wouldn't want any other subject taught that way, where the different grade levels didn't know what the last one had taught and what they were supposed to teach and where they were going next, so that you could build a progression of learning. We haven't had that in the arts. That's what I'm suggesting we need.
It's coordination on some levels. It's literally about, and I think we spoke about this a few years ago when it was beginning, that literally it's about having central planning of this, that to make sure that things that have happened that I've seen, where one school will have just an incredible amount of visits of various types of arts organizations, and 2 blocks away there's a school which never gets any.
That's right.
And it's simply a matter of someone really looking at that.
A, that's not fair, but B, even in the school with lots of arts, unless there is a coordination of what you had before and what you're having next, there isn't even necessarily good learning happening.
Right, so
learning,
it's two levels of coordination.
Learning is not just about being exposed to something. Learning is actually about being taught something, and that takes a consecutive set of experiences.
Well, and it's subjective to the different communities, too. I know that in New York City, with Silk Road Project, which I do work with Yo-Yo Ma, we take the Silk Road curriculum, if you will, which is a 6th grade curriculum. That's when you learn about geography on that level, and the arts are integrated into those classrooms, and that just becomes something that happens.
And wouldn't it be great if in the 5th grade and the 4th grade and the 3rd grade and then in the 7th grade and the 8th grade, there was some progression so that what they had learned before led to that experience, and then afterwards they were going to build on that experience. And wouldn't it be great if you could organize with Carnegie Hall and the Lincoln Center and the Metropolitan Opera and the Metropolitan Museum and all these groups, so that you could create that sequential path? That's what we're suggesting.
And when you go in with any given child, go in. It sounds like go in, but there's a
When
day
we're invited
there
in.
is a day when it begins.
Right.
Does it begin with that comprehensive?
Yes, it begins with everyone in the room. It begins with all the organizations and everyone in the room and all the educators in the room, and that's how it starts. It is not a Kennedy Center project. All we are essentially is a consultant to how to organize your community to do something in a more effective way. So we're just introducing a concept, but everyone's in the same room. And there's a collaborative of all the organizations and educators together creating this path.
Let's turn to DeVos. So this is now going to be housed at University of Maryland.
Correct.
And it's been going on now for, are we over 10 years?
Yeah, we're 13 years of
13
DeVos.
years of DeVos in various as it's
Various
developed,
names, yeah.
Various names, but also in scale and countries and ambition.
Yes.
And was the crisis management that was going on from 2009 in the economic crisis a part of DeVos, or was that
It was.
It was.
It was. When the stock market crashed in September of 2008 after Lehman Brothers collapsed, I got very nervous that this would have a huge impact on arts organizations. And I was especially nervous that the first thing organizations would do would be to cut back on their art. And so we did 2 things. One is I went on a speaking tour. I went to 69 cities in all 50 states talking about what to do and what not to do. And that was one part. And the other part was we offered free consulting to any performing arts organization in the United States that felt they needed help. And what we did is we matched the needy organization with a mentor. We asked for volunteer mentors, and we ended up working with 680 arts organizations in a grassroots effort. It was hundreds of mentors and hundreds of organizations, and it was really sort of an astonishing experience to oversee that. But I think an awful lot of organizations ended up really surviving after those experiences. It was really great.
So
and no one spent a penny. There was not one penny charged or one penny changing hand. It was all
Interesting.
volunteer.
Well, I can say that in 2009, I called Michael because I was beginning to direct a program for the Jerome Robbins Foundation addressing similarly the concern about creativity and artistic product of choreography specifically. Basically, what Michael said is that you're an organization who's up against the wall. You may not commission that ballet, which means that you're going to cut down on your output, which means that you're actually going to cut down on the opportunities for new work. Bad for the field, bad for your company. So, and Michael helped me greatly in modeling how this could be shared, how works could be shared among different geographic regions, and so the impact could be tripled in many cases. So, he was doing management of many kinds during that economic crisis. And do you feel like the impact was sustainable, for these organizations that you dealt with in the crisis?
For many it was. For many they just needed that moment in time or that some advice. Some just needed a shoulder to cry on. After 2008, the broad estimate was that 10,000 of our roughly 100,000 arts organizations would go bankrupt in America, and nowhere near that number did. And which is fantastic. And so I think we weathered the storm, but I believe there's bigger storms ahead than that.
Let's look to that now. I know you've almost completed or have completed a book looking ahead, which takes into account, of course, where we've been. You gave me an astonishing kind of figure, building off the Metropolitan Opera.
Sure.
Do you want to?
Yeah, I'm doing a book. It's called 2035, and it's sort of my view of what the arts world will look like in 20 years. And it's been a sort of depressing exercise in a certain way, and also an interesting one. But I think the numbers that Damian's talking about was, I have the box office statement for a standard performance at the Met in 1960, when that same ticket that now costs $300 cost $10. That's a multiplier of 30 times, from 10 to 300. Whereas in inflation has gone up only 8 times. And we see an inflation in ticket prices because for many decades, arts organizations try to balance their budgets by inflating their ticket prices. And what happened was 2 terrible things. One is our audiences started to become very non-diverse in every respect. And number 2 was an awful lot of people just said, you know what, the arts are not for me. They're just not relevant to me. I can't afford this. And I really do believe pricing is huge, because we do a free performance every day at the Kennedy Center that Garth runs, and we get huge crowds for that. And every time we do a free performance by the National Symphony, or we get huge crowds for that. I don't believe the arts are irrelevant to people. I just think they're way too expensive. And that, I think, is, but if you have something that's too expensive for you for year in and year out, year in and year out, you start to say, well, I could never participate. The way I could never own a yacht. To me, the notion of owning a yacht just doesn't even enter into my consciousness. I don't read yachting magazines. I don't care about yachts because I'll never own a yacht. It has nothing to do with my life. A lot of people have that about the arts. And there's a lot of other ways to be entertained now. And so you can have a great life without the arts. I couldn't, but you could, and a lot of people do. And we're training them away because things are just so darn expensive.
Well, it's, the evidence is clear. I know that Target does nights at MoMA in New York, and those nights are around the block, and it's just people lining up to go, and that happens in lots of different circumstances. But the other figure that just struck me strongly is that with that Met figure is that with that factor of 30 came along also a similar but inverse reaction to how much those tickets actually covered of the budget. Right. It was completely different. I think it was something like 65 or 70% of the budget, and then now down to about 30% of
That's
the budget.
Right. It's we've had this terrible inflation. Now, part of that inflation in the arts, it comes from an underlying economic factor which we just can't avoid, and that is that we don't improve worker productivity in the arts very well. You know, in every other industry, the steel industry, the auto industry now make cars with many fewer people hours than they used to. And every year you read in the newspaper, worker productivity went up 3% or 2.8% or 4%. And this is crucial because when worker productivity goes up, it mitigates inflation a bit. It reduces inflation a bit because the salary portion doesn't go up so much because we're making the product for less man hours. The problem in the arts is, let's take Serenade, created in 1935, to my mind, the greatest work of art ever.
Yes, Michael.
Okay.
Yes, Michael.
I get my
Yes.
my balancing credits
Finally.
back.
Finally said it.
1935. How many dancers are in Serenade?
I should know that. Is it
You
22?
should. Something
Yeah,
like 22
yeah,
dancers then, 22 dancers now, right? And it's not danced faster every year, you know? It just is what it is. We don't play Beethoven's Fifth faster and faster and faster and faster in order to be more productive. We have the same number of artists and the same amount of time. We don't improve worker productivity in the arts. And what that means is we don't have that dampening of inflation. Since people costs are such a huge part of our cost structure, our costs go up faster than in other industries. And to a lot of people, particularly a lot of board members, I have to say, of a lot of arts organizations, that looks like we're spendthrifts, you know, that we just are wasteful. And you see that image, that caricature in movies, Hollywood movies, you know, the artistic director running around wasting money and spending money they don't have and stuff. And it's just not true. We are one of the most efficient industries. We waste so little. We have so little to spend. But the truth is our inflation is higher in the arts than it is in other industries because we don't improve worker productivity. And as a result, our costs go up fast. That's a really important thing to keep in mind.
Can you make an optimistic case?
Absolutely. I am incredibly optimistic for any organization that says the key thing is we're really going to focus on amazing art. And we're going to forget everything else for a minute and just think about art. And we're going to encourage our artistic leaders to dream. And we're going to think about this far in advance. And we're going to really rally around a few projects that make so much sense and are so amazing. And we're not going to count numbers of performances or how many productions. We're going to count excellence and excitement and things that are just riveting. And if we can start to do more and more of that, and if more organizations thought that way, I can see an absolutely glorious future for the arts. But because what we're going to do is we're going to woo people away from their iPads and into our theaters. I did a lot of work in South Africa in the middle 1990s. Just after my first trip was 3 weeks after Nelson Mandela was elected president. And I was brought there by the Ford Foundation to save the Market Theater, which is one of the great theater companies of the earth. It's where all the protest theater was born. All the works of Athol Fugard that you might have seen, Master Harold and the Boys, was first done at the Market Theater. And the Market was very important because it exported that theater around the world. And it really taught us about the horrors of apartheid in a very personal way that I think really did change political views about apartheid and about South Africa. It's a great place, but it happens to have been in a very bad neighborhood. And in the mid-1990s, there was a lot of petty crime in South Africa. There was a lot of focus on crime in South Africa. And a lot of people didn't want to go to the Market Theater. And the Market Theater was not doing so well. And yet, all of a sudden, when a few Hollywood stars came to the Market Theater, people were lining up around the block, very fancy people, to come and see Danny Glover at the Market Theater because he came and paid a visit, or Bill Cosby because he paid a visit. And also, no one was afraid of the crime anymore. And the truth is, I believe we can get people to want to see something because it's astonishing. And now we have the benefit of viral technology, that something truly can go viral. And so something that can happen and can be amazing, and everyone can know about it within an hour. And so we have the ability to market now in new and cheaper ways, and we need to now have the product that's so dynamic and wonderful that people want to support that and want to visit it. And yes, if lots of organizations did that, and if at the same time we work collectively to create smart arts education programs and effective arts education programs, absolutely I can see a positive scenario. But it takes a lot of organizations doing that because we don't have a minister of culture in this country. We don't have someone to make that happen. Each organization has to decide to do it for itself.
Wonderful. So we're going to go to questions now. I ask that if you're at the table, please press your button. If you're not, there'll be a microphone, or just speak loudly. And make it a short question for Michael. And bear in mind, we have a limited amount of time. Thank you. Ethelbert Miller. Right in front of me.
Yes, I wonder if you could talk about the role art criticism might play in the development of the arts.
Oh, thank you. It's a critical topic, and we're in transition there as well. I've written about this, and I get in trouble again. Let me just say publicly, I love the fact that anyone can put anything they want to say on the internet. I love it. I love it. It's great. Tweet to your heart's content. But a 140-character tweet is not the same as a thoughtful critique from someone who makes their career studying an art form. It's not the same thing. I'm not saying one shouldn't happen. I'm just saying it's not the same thing. And I mourn the fact that so many newspapers are losing their professional critics. And I worry about the star journalist phenomenon. I was reading about Ezra Klein leaving the Washington Post. And it scared me for the arts because I read how it's now more profitable for a journalist to go and do their own thing and have their own brand, because they can have their own website and do all their stuff and sell their advertising and get subscribers, and they don't need the institution of the newspaper anymore to do their writing. I fear that's going to happen in the arts as well. I think what's great about professional arts criticism is the diversity of opinions that you get to read about, rather than just one. And so I love professional critics, and I would love to see a diversity of points of view, and I really hope that we don't move into a world where anyone's point of view, as anonymous as it might be, is considered equal to anyone else's. I think that's a shame. And by the way, if I could say one thing, it hurts the creation of new and different and experimental art, because the professional press has often been the champions and the people who pressure for what's new and different, and I think that's great.
Yeah, to me, it builds a supply and demand. It's arts education as well. It's what Bernstein talked about to Congress, I think, in the mid-'70s. He said, we need that in the arts, actually. That's right. We need to be pushed. What pushes us most is if you know something. If you actually know something, we have to do better. We have to actually, if every child could read music, there'd be better composers, because every child would read music. In the back.
So you talked about the phenomenon of inflation. You talked about inflation in the arts on the expense side over the last half century, and the examples you gave were sort of, about the performers, right? But I think that there's a lot of evidence to suggest that there's been a lot of inflation on the administrative side too.
It has.
And so I was wondering if you could elaborate on that
Sure.
a little bit and why that might have been the case.
Sure. As we start to charge more and more for our tickets, and as we've lost part of a generation that cared about the arts, we've had to market more aggressively, and we've had to push for more ticket sales, and sometimes push for ticket sales from people who aren't the easiest to sell to, and that requires bigger marketing staffs, or it seems to require bigger marketing staffs. And as Damian mentioned, as contributed income has become a bigger part of the mix, our development staffs have gotten larger and larger and larger. So I agree with you. We've had a big inflation on the administrative side, and it's not just on the cost that worries me, it's also on the impact on the art making. Because more and more and more we have the development staff and the marketing staff saying, do you really have to do Lulu? Can't you do La Boheme? And so it's not just on the cost structure, it's also on the impact on the art making. I think that's I think it's part of taking the power back to the artists is part of that as well.
Rona, do you have a question?
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I have a quick question about arts
You
education.
press your button. Thanks. Thank you.
Okay. Question about arts ed. In the district, in DC, the commission is going to start to do a census on what's going on in different schools for arts ed. And we already have some community information. How would you suggest starting, and I really like your sequential idea, a sequential program for arts ed here locally?
We would have loved to have done that. It's our home territory. Why are we in 14 cities and not? We do a ton of arts education in Washington, D.C. I don't want to say we
You
don't
do,
do.
you do.
But we couldn't put any given child in. I've had seven chancellors in my 13 years. I think it's 7. It might be 6. But it's just one after the other after the other. So to put in a real system requires continuity at the top, and we've not had that here so well. We even try to do the census you're talking about of what's in the schools, and we could not, no one in the Washington, D.C. school system knew what arts education was happening in the Washington, D.C. school system. It's a very challenging activity to do. Would it be worthwhile? Absolutely. But I really believe one has to get mayors and city councils and superintendents committing to this, not doing it from below. You got to do it from above to get that commitment.
Oh, it's interesting because that's very much what's been going on in Chicago, which I'm sure you're aware of, with the
Absolutely.
cultural plan that was put in by Mayor Emanuel, and then arts education plan, which is all based on the coordination model, essentially.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Please, Meryl.
Thank you. I've been listening to this with a great deal of interest because I used to write for the Washington Post, and I walked around the site of the Kennedy Center before, as it was being built. So that's a long time ago. My husband runs an arts organization, and I think there's one thing that's sort of missing in your recipe for to turn around an arts organizations. And may I say, I'd like your comment on this. How indeed do you find a really exciting idea to turn an organization around, and not just one that people think is exciting because their taste isn't very good? So
Yes.
I'll leave that to you.
No, I will commend to you the book that I published last fall called The Cycle, which has a whole chapter on artistic planning, because I really discussed that issue a bunch. And it's not about following the herd, and it's not about a sort of a focus group getting together. You know, my favorite example is, you know, the most disastrous automobile ever designed, the Ford Edsel, was the first automobile designed by focus groups. Ford Motor went around and had groups look at headlights and tail fins and all the thing and said, what do you like the best? And they ended up making a car that everyone was going to like the most, except no one wanted it. I can't tell you how an artist comes up with a wonderful inspiration, but I will tell you that if you say to an artist, I want you to, you're free to dream of what you want, rather than to try and push this through a focus group. I promise you'll get better art that way. And what's happening too much in arts organizations now is that we're not allowing our artists to think freely. We're constraining their thinking, and that's where I think you end up with less interesting art.
Interesting. Please.
Michael, could you comment about the arts forum that's coming to the Kennedy Center this weekend?
Sure, thank you. We're having my wonderful chairman, David Rubenstein, had an idea. He said, he goes to Davos every year, and he said, wouldn't it be great to have sort of an arts version of Davos? And so this weekend is our first attempt, and we're doing 2 days to discuss some of the key issues facing the arts today. And it's really centered around 3 panels. One is a panel of board chairs, one is a panel of arts managers, and one is a panel of artists. And then we have 2 keynote addresses, one by Mayor Julian Castro of San Antonio, and the other by Julie Taymor. And you know, people on the panels include Judith Jamison and Terrence Blanchard and Debbie Voigt, and chairs of the Miami City Ballet and the London Symphony, and Deborah Borda from LA Phil. And so it's a rich mix of people who will be talking about some of these key issues. And you know, we have to address them.
Okay, one last question. Misha?
Oh, hi, Michael. I just want to say I got to know your work through Dan Haggerty, and give him my regards if you're in Florida.
I will.
How do you distinguish outreach and engagement from just aggressive marketing, and is there a place for that in arts organizations, and how does that work?
I think there is a difference. Garth runs our engagement activities, and while sometimes the corollary benefits are the same, I think they're very different. I think marketing is really about 2 things. One is about saying to people, come next Thursday's performance at Giselle, or the Shakespeare Theater is the most amazing place and the most fun place to be. Engagement is really about getting to the community into the community and allowing people to experience the arts and to build their own relationship to the arts. I think that's a different process, and it's a different intention than marketing. Marketing, there's a crassness to marketing, which a crassness we need, but it's a crassness to it, whereas engagement is about what we offer back to the community and how we allow people to engage with the work we do. So I think they're very different in structure, in motivation, and in practice. But I do think they're confused an awful lot, and a lot of people use the word engagement when they're really trying to do marketing. And there's a, I'm forgetting the word, tokenism to the activity, which I don't believe works. It's one of the reasons why this is Garth's full-time job. He has a whole department. We have a department called Performing Arts for Everyone. We've had it for now 16 years. And that's their entire focus. They're not about selling tickets. Nothing they do gets charged for. It's about how do we allow many different kinds of people to experience the things that we find so beautiful.
I think it's safe to say in some ways that genuine and sincere engagement is great marketing.
That's right.
But if you set about it to be marketing, then it's, you know,
Same
what
corollary
we always say
benefit,
when I'm on the other side of the footlights is the audience knows. The audience knows the difference. They
do.
They just absolutely know. And it's about, I mean, to me, we've discussed the ideas of, you know, the 21st century artist and artist organization really has been shifting more towards that engagement as a way of life. I think the ideas of citizen artists and the ability to partake in society and not simply be to be seen or heard has been a dramatic, you know, shift in the last years.
Which is ironic because the mission statements have always had engagement right in there. We do this for our communities. We do this for the broadest part of our communities. It's always in the words. It just hasn't necessarily been in the actions. And that's one of the reasons why so many people feel the arts are irrelevant to them.
Right, right. Well, I want to close by just saying, Michael, you know, one of the things that I think about when I think about you is saying yes to things and being available for possibility. I mean, in my life, you enabled me to come back and dance at Kennedy Center with City Ballet. City Ballet had performed there, and I first joined 85 and 86, and not again until, I mean, what year was it? 2002 maybe, or 3?
3 maybe, yeah.
When Michael had returned, had taken on the post as head of Kennedy Center, and miraculously somehow it all worked out. And I know it wasn't a miracle, but...
It was very simple. We each had a union contract. Our orchestra had to play for all ballet performances, and the City Ballet's orchestra had to play for all their performances, so they never came, because we would have had 2 orchestras. So I just went to both unions and said, it's better to have them come every year than not. So how about 1 year it's our orchestra, 1 year it's their orchestra? They said fine, and so we have them every year now. Wasn't that hard?
Well, but that gives you an example about the availability to say yes, this can work, which I think is a typical aspect of why you've made such a difference in the arts, because you always pick up the phone, whether, in my experience, again, over the Robbins Project, or, you know, last week we discussed, you know, Sphinx and Aaron Dworkin and how things can get better and how things can go. So we wish you every good thing as you go on.
Thank you.
And you have much to do left at Kennedy Center this year, obviously, starting with the
do.
forum this weekend, and lots of impact to make, and look for many years of collaboration.
Thank you. Thank you all very much.